Thank you for allowing me to moderate a very set of distinguished panelists today to talk about planes, trains, and automobiles. So yesterday we had a chance to get a brief glimpse into Toyota's fundamental belief that when you are free to move, anything is possible. And as you saw yesterday from all of the amazing innovations and business models and new technologies and even cultural changes going on inside of companies, there's a lot of people making the impossible possible. And who didn't come here who thought that they would see right around the corner real practical fusion energy coming to the table? I thought that was pretty amazing. And I think Professor White was in the audience earlier. And I just want to say that, Professor White, if you are making something, I don't know about yay size, I have some engineers that I'd like you to talk to. We also saw yesterday Michael Mosserman from Lyft give you a little bit of a glimpse into what's going on in the world of autonomous, connected, electrified, and shared vehicle. We call it ACEs. And they're going to have a really profound impact on the world. And exactly how that's going to come to life is a little bit unknown. But what we do know is that transportation at large is so connected to everything else that we do that we're going to need a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different types of solutions from cross-functional experts, not just thinking about this embedded in the industry, but thinking about it from their own perspectives. And so for that, we thought we'd get a panel today that has a lot of really unique and talented individuals that come at it from a different perspective. And so I'd like to have them do their own introductions today. But if you will please join me in welcoming our 4 diverse panelists. If you guys would come on out as I'm announcing you. Jason Waggoner, President and CEO of Star Wagons. Michelle Romero, Deputy Director, Green for All. Mike Hart, President and CEO of Sierra Energy. And Zach Lyman, serial entrepreneur, including founder and managing partner of Reluminati. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for coming today. We'll talk a little bit about sort of bits and bytes going on around in the industry of transportation. And one thing I think that's important to sort of set the stage is this notion of the sharing economy has really impacted a lot of other industries already. We talk about Airbnb in the hotel industry and a lot of different types of business models that are extracting value from different assets that aren't always being used. And the transportation industry is no different. It's really impacting us right now. Even to the point, as we talked about yesterday, where the sort of traditional love for the personal automobile is maybe waning a little bit, which is really going to open up some really new, interesting possibilities. So I want to talk about some of those innovations today, talk about how these trends are impacting this overall sector. If you would, go down the line here. If we could start with you, introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your organization, and talk about some of the interesting innovations and initiatives that are going on in your world. So, Jason, you want to start out?
Sure. My name is Jason Waggoner, and president over at Star Wagons. If you're in the entertainment industry, I'm sure you've seen our trailers. If you're not in the industry, our trailers have blocked your driveways and streets for years here in Los Angeles. And so we've always taken a very sustainable approach to the way that we've constructed the trailers. We're actually the manufacturer of the trailers. And as a father, it's incredibly important to make sure that the way that we're building the equipment, that it doesn't just go drive into a landfill and sit there and rot, that we're using materials that are recyclable or in a way that we can get the most value out of it.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Okay,
Great.
Michelle.
So I'm Michelle Romero, and I lead Green for All. Van Jones co-founded our organization 10 years ago to build an inclusive green economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty. So what we do is advance clean energy solutions and green economy solutions that are going to bring the green economy to disadvantaged communities. To give you an example of this, we're driving investments that are bringing things like electric van pools to Huron, California, an isolated agricultural community of 7,000 people, where 25% of the population doesn't own a car. They don't have an established bus system. It can take 2 or 3 hours to get to a hospital in a county that has high asthma rates, right? And creating a more reliable transportation system that isn't going to further pollute their community.
Great, thanks. And Mike will introduce you, but I think you have a video to show before we do that. Can we roll that?
We do. Back in 2001, my railroad was looking for a way to get out of using fossil-based fuels. We found the solution in biodiesel. We became the first railroad in the world to run on 100% biodiesel. But as I looked into it further, making biodiesel from crops didn't strike me as the best environmental solution. We worked with UC Davis and came up with a solution, making a carbon-negative fuel from waste.
Great.
Thank you. Our railroad decided to make this fuel, and the way we did it was taking garbage. And we found that for every ton of garbage that you throw away into a landfill, you make 6.2 tons of greenhouse gas in the form of methane. Methane's 86 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. And so by taking that and preventing it from going in the landfill in the first place, it's possible to make a carbon-negative fuel. As we've been developing the technology over the years, the really interesting thing we found is that gas can be used for a lot of other things as well, one of which is renewable hydrogen. We can make renewable hydrogen for a cost of about 43 cents a gasoline gallon equivalent that's carbon negative.
Oh, great, thank you very much. All right, and Zach.
So I'm Zach Lyman. I run a company called Reluminati. We're kind of a collaborative network of experts that play on the kind of intersection of emerging technology and social impact. And that can range in a wide kind of variation of projects, everything from deploying microgrids to Uganda to, right now we're helping the city of Washington, D.C. deploy a sensor suite so that they can schedule and tune their entire real estate portfolio and optimize the systems. So we get to play on a lot of fun levels, and it's great to be here.
All right, great. Thank you for all your introductions. So what I'd like to do, I'll have some questions I'll direct it at some of you, but I would love you all to weigh in, because again, getting the different perspectives on each of these questions I think is really important. Jason, why don't we start out with you? Your business has actually been active in the sharing economy before the sharing economy ever became popular. What innovations have you seen, and what are you seeing that's starting to emerge that's already making a positive environmental impact?
Sure. We didn't know that we were in the sharing economy until I started hearing about Airbnb. and so that for us, it was always leasing. And I guess the key to sharing economy is own less and then consume only what you need. And in the production field, where you have a production that would only last from 10 weeks to 14 weeks, maybe 16 weeks at a max span, for a production company to go out and buy all this equipment doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because they would basically be consuming a lot of resources, and then at the end of that 16 weeks, disposing of it. So being in this shared economy, that's what our business has been based on. Some of the innovations, though, that we've seen, and some of the things that we get, the idea behind the sharing economy is you're getting a ton of people using your equipment or using your whatever product it is that you have. So as a result, you get a lot of feedback. And feedback as far as, hey, have you thought about this? Is this going to work better? We have this particular need. And so we'll, like an example, hey, we've got a lot of kids that are on set. Have you ever considered building a school trailer? Hey, I've got a superhero that needs a gym trailer. Have you ever considered that? So a lot of these innovations, as far as coming from ideas of new products, those come directly from the field. The other thing that we're finding in a hyper-centric industry like the film industry, is where you have so many activists and environmentalists, is that we also get a ton of feedback. Hey, have you considered using renewable fuels? And so in 2006, one of the first things that we did is we employed a solar hybrid trailer. And back in 2006, it wasn't just that trailer, because the panels weren't powerful enough, and so you would have a trailer, and then you'd have another trailer that would just have solar panels on it. The technology now has come to a point where that's much more viable. And so we're employing that in a version 2.0 of a solar trailer that we'll be seeing here very, very quickly, and incorporating that technology more and more. One of the great things that we took a look at, and that was brought to us from the Environmental Media Association, working with Darby Stanfield over at Scandal, was they were having a problem where they had a lot of, not these, because these are great, but a bunch of plastic bottles that were around set. And so what we did is we incorporated a filtrated water system into the makeup trailer. And if you've ever been on a set, makeup trailer is where it's the hub. It's where all the excitement happens. It's the gossip trailer. It's where the actors are. It's where they're spending the most time. So it's usually right in the middle of a production site. So there we've deployed these and saving thousands and thousands of bottles because people were able to go up, everyone in the crew could go up without actually going inside and disturbing the actors. So that's one of the other things. Safety and quality was another thing that we were getting a lot of feedback. And then, of course, materials. Higher R value on the walls so that they were better insulated, and getting more and more feedback of actually how we could do this. And we're seeing those innovations take place on a regular basis, and we're applying them in every opportunity that we get a chance to.
Right, and you know, we talk about sort of the history of cars, and a lot of the time it has a useful life, and then it gets scrapped and ripped apart. But there are ways of using that material, recycling, and reusing it in the same platform, correct?
Yeah. So that idea I was talking about, driving a trailer off a cliff and into a landfill. In a lot of cases, you know, a lot of the materials that are on the trailer are completely recyclable. And for as long as I've been president of the company, we've reached out to Forest Stewardship Council to make sure that the wood that we use is environmentally friendly, and our trailers are wrapped in aluminum. So there's all these ways that we can not just scrap a trailer. And in fact, in a lot of cases where the chassis is made of some heavy-duty steel, that you could throw a VW into the side of it and it's not going to damage it. But if it's at the end of its useful life and it's not as attractive, or we'll say it's vintage looking, we could actually scrape it down to the chassis, recycle all of the different parts on it, and then build something new and that has all of the bells and whistles that are current. So new technologies when it comes to remote control, being able to monitor all of the systems on the unit remotely, more fuel efficient materials and so on, and then creating the solar and the solar hybrid. So it's exciting.
That's great. It's great that you're implementing all those technologies and techniques to make it more efficient.
Yeah.
Zach, I wanted to switch to you a little bit. The innovation we're seeing in transportation is really going to change how people get around. I've had the fortune of working on 4 different generations of Prius, and now recently the fuel cell Mirai, and I had some very interesting stories about how people react to new technology that's coming out in the sector. And in fact, one time I was at a trade fair showing off Prius, when it was relatively new, people didn't know it. I was explaining it has a battery on board that's roughly 400 volts. And the woman looked at me and said, "Oh my gosh, 400 volts. Well, what if I was driving it and I drove off a bridge into the water? Wouldn't it electrocute me?" And I thought, that's the least of your problems at this point. But that's how they think about it. It's something that's unique and scary. So and there's a lot of new innovation, and it's hard for people to change. So you have a lot of work in the design space and thinking about this. How do you get people to change and adapt these new technologies?
So I love this question. It's kind of something we think about all the time. I used to think of myself as a technologist, but I'm only interested in the technology in the context of how people use it and how it affects lives. And so Drew Fitzgerald makes fun of me every day because I use the word systems more times than he cares to enjoy. But it's a systems approach. You cannot have a single silver bullet that transforms things. You have to have a policy approach. You have to have an outreach approach. You have to have a kind of education and So it's a little bit of everything, I think, that has to go into a new technology adoption. And you have to convey the advantages of why the switch is worth it. And if you don't have a systems approach, it doesn't get adopted. I mean, we see that all the time with technology in the field. You have the greatest solution, and you put it in the middle of nowhere, and you give no context to why or how to use it. It sits, and it breaks, and it doesn't get fixed again. So, it's very much for me about the system or ecosystem that you put in place around the product or idea that translates into more adoption. And I find that kind of fascinating as a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the recent things that you're working on in that space with systems approaches?
Well, the kind of the research project that's ongoing for us that I find most fascinating relating to transportation technologies is municipalities are increasingly thinking about what does it mean when you have a set of batteries in an electric vehicle that's on wheels that you can move around? If you have 2,000 of those and the power goes out, can you move them to communities to support communities, community medical systems or something like that? Can you, if you're Uber and you have 1 million people that you can manage by an app, or you have electric buses, or you have some aspect of interconnecting ad hoc networks of batteries on wheels, what does that mean? We were talking earlier, it's kind of the Wild West for this stuff, and it's so fun to play with, because nobody really knows yet how it's going to play out. But for my world, that's one of the more exciting and interesting things we're playing with.
Great, thanks. And systems approach is really it's not a new science, but I think it's gaining a lot of popularity, realizing that you can't solve these things with the silver bullet. And I think, we would certainly reflect that from a Toyota philosophy as well.
I think just one other thing on that, we have a whole ton of precedent to model from, right? The internet is a perfect example of a system that shifted from single brittle mainframe units to smart systems of nodal architectures. And what we're seeing in energy, we're seeing in water, we're seeing in automotive is this shift to a distributed future. And for me, that's super exciting because that's what I like to work on. And I mean, Toyota's certainly out in front of all of that stuff for sure.
Yeah, I mean, distribute, we talk about, as I mentioned earlier, ACE is autonomous, connected, electrified, and shared. And the whole notion of that is a system. We have autonomous vehicles being able to pick people up at the right place at the right time, can conceivably be much more efficient than the personally owned vehicle scenario of today, and also deliver the same value, equal value to that user of the end transportation. Those are networks. Mm-hmm. Those are distributed networks that are really important. And I think that thinking around connecting those new kind of ways of moving around to that user experience, and how does that new person that's just first experiencing this network, what is it like for them? What are they learning? What are they taking away from it so they can connect to the value and realize that it's a different mode for them?
Totally.
It's really important. But it's not without its drawbacks, too. We talk about autonomous vehicles. Those of you that paid attention to this space, there's a lot of talk about what's the downside. The downside is that there's a huge job sector out there of drivers right now. And of course, Uber and Lyft drivers come to mind the most, but you think about all of the freight, all the other types of trucking that's out there, bus drivers, et cetera. If every car is driving around on its own, what happens to all those drivers? So it's kind of a big question. And I wondered, Michelle, if you might comment on this, because your background is particularly insightful for this.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we go to autonomous vehicles, which we will one day, right? A lot of people will lose jobs. And so that actually presents a huge problem and an opportunity. And so I think about it in two ways. The problem is that we live in a country where our social safety net isn't really there to set up a support system for those people who will lose their jobs. We're not in a country that has really embraced concepts like universal basic income or ways to support people who won't have jobs to go to. We talk a lot about retraining, right? Well, we'll just, the coal miners, for example, as an example, we'll retrain them and they can get into solar jobs, or they can get into wind, or they can get into these new technologies. That may be true for some, but even in that scenario, not for everyone, right? People nearing retirement aren't going to really start over. And so, one, our social safety net needs to actually catch up, and we need to change the culture around that. The politics don't suggest that will happen anytime soon, and so that's a reality. And we're going to need companies who are moving the technology forward to be partners in this and figuring it out and building that support that we need. The opportunity, though, is that, in some ways, Ford creating the assembly line sort of turned us all into machines a long time ago. It was a manual process, right? But we, as human beings, served one particular function, and we learned that function really well. Even today in our education systems with standardized testing, where it's drill and kill, and you get really good at that one thing, or regurgitating information. What happens when we free up all of these drivers or people who are employed in one sector now to be full human creative beings again? The opportunities there are actually really exciting to imagine, how much more we could evolve and grow and change in the world that we could create. But again, there are so many things that need to catch up for that to happen, including our education system, right? Are we even educating people to think creatively, to create, what do they do when they've been learned to educate to the test, and then all of a sudden it's, well, what do you think? And what should you do? Right. And what will you create?
Right. Yeah. Great. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. There's a lot of attention on these issues that we kind of hear about every day because we're using these applications, or we're a lot of us in this room are sort of in the front line of understanding what that new transportation mode is. But there's a lot of transportation behind the scenes as well that we don't think about very often. I think one of those is in that video. Talk about the railroads. It's a backbone of the economy in many ways, but how many of us have taken a train ride recently? How many have taken a train ride recently? There's like 4 or 5 hands. Oh, that's pretty good. Not too bad. So cars get the lion's share of the attention, but there's a lot happening behind the scenes. I wondered, Mike, if you could comment about what you are seeing. Talk about this journey you took on the railroad side and where you're at right now.
Sure. One thing that people don't realize is that railroads are carrying more freight today than at any point in history. You just don't see them as often. The trains are much bigger. They carry a lot more weight. Our railroads, Sierra Railroad Company, we're actually the oldest private railroad, also known as Hollywood's favorite railroad. We've done 400 movies to date. But on our freight railroads, I got tired of just seeing diesel. And so switching to biodiesel was great. But we're now going beyond that, and we're switching to hydrogen. And we're actually building our first 2 hydrogen-fueled locomotives running on a fuel cell. And so that means you'll have a zero-emission locomotive. And our FastOx technology, the Sierra Energy, what we were talking about earlier, that technology allows us to take any form of garbage, anything, trash, medical waste, hazardous waste, all of it. Recycle whatever makes economic sense. We'll take the rest. We heat it at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. We break it down molecularly. We recycle 100% of the waste stream. We create this gas that's carbon monoxide and hydrogen. You can take that hydrogen and use it in a fuel cell to make a zero-emission fuel. And so what that means is, when I was talking earlier about garbage creating methane, you prevent that from going into the atmosphere. Globally, we're going to throw away about 2.2 billion tons of trash a year. Picture a line of garbage trucks starting in San Francisco, solid line all the way to New York City, every single day. That's how much we're throwing away. And that 2.2 billion tons of trash multiplied by 6.2. Over 13 billion tons of greenhouse gas coming from that waste. So our objective is to take that and turn it into valuable fuels like hydrogen, while recovering all of the metal, all of the inorganic solids, by liquefying it and actually recovering it. Our process uses no external energy and has no emissions in the process itself. We developed it with the U.S. Army. And that picture that you saw at the end of the video was our very first commercial system, built here in Monterey, California. So we just finished, and we actually started testing this month. So we have 8,000 requests from people around the world that are looking to move into this transportation sector, about trying to take waste and turn it into hydrogen for their fleets. turning hydrogen into locomotives, one of the big things that I hope to see happen as well. But we can also make electricity with it as well for electric fueled vehicles as well.
Great, thank you.
Can I just say that he gets to play with trains and trash at scale? Like, for those of us in the social impact nerd world, like, Mike's my hero, right? Like, these are the greatest things ever. So,
Yeah.
you add submarines, I'm all in. Like, whatever I get.
That's very cool. I agree. I absolutely agree. I thought it was interesting, some of the themes that came up here about we're all constantly learning. We're all constantly learning about transportation, what are more positive ways of moving people and moving goods that can help our environment. And Mike had an interesting story about going in the biodiesel direction and then realizing maybe there was another direction. I just wonder if I open up to the panel about what have you seen where you thought you were doing the right thing, but you had to shift gears or you had to think about something differently than you had been led to believe at that point.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say, I think in general, sometimes the environmental movement thinks that the issue of getting these technologies to disadvantaged communities is convincing them they should care as much as white, more affluent, coastal liberal elites, right? Like that whole bucket, and that it's that they don't care or they don't understand or they don't know how much value it'll bring. I think what we found in our work is sometimes it's about how to actually finance the solutions, right? Whether you're a struggling, low-income resident who can't afford the upfront cost of solar panels that, yes, will save you money after you get them, but you don't have that cash up front, right? Or in the transportation scenario, transportation agencies, school districts, especially low-income school districts that can't afford batches of electric buses, sure, they know now that it'll save them on the back end, but affording the quantity that's needed. And so we've begun starting to look at how do we work with public utilities, for example, to finance the upfront costs so that these agencies can purchase more and we can get to scale. And it's a win-win situation in that, or a win-win-win situation, right? The government agencies save money, it makes it affordable, the community health is improved, and then the utilities are gaining new customers.
And I'm sure there's entrepreneurial opportunities behind that as well, and the financing and of all that as well. So that's terrific.
Yeah.
We talked about earlier the great talk with Dr. Lemery about the impact of the environment on health. And we talk a lot about environmental justice, the impact of the environment, the local environment in many ways on disadvantaged communities. All of you in one way, shape, or form are connecting with those communities. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, how you can help support them or what you've seen from your different perspective. Feel free, anybody just jump into that.
Just very briefly. When people hear that we take garbage and we heat it up and they go, oh, it's an incinerator. It's like, no, God, no, totally different technology. But people respond that way. I was in China, and the Chinese government, they had invited me out to see a number of their facilities. They were trying to use our technology there. And we went to one community. They were very proud of this brand new 2,000 ton a day incinerator. And they were asking us to take and see what they were doing and then actually use our technology for their places all over the place. We arrived. There was a solid wall of people blocking the buses. Our buses full of Chinese party officials and dignitary. I guess I was a dignitary. But they were out there to show us this thing. The people were blocking the road. This is a brand new facility. And these are high-ranking Chinese officials, and they weren't letting them in because people are so angry there about dioxins and furans, things that are incredibly cancer-causing pollutants that are coming from incineration. They don't want their communities poisoned anymore. They don't want to be the dumping ground of the world's trash. In fact, on January 1st of this year, China stopped taking our recycling. All of the contaminated plastic, contaminated papers, things like that we've been blindly dumping on China and pretending it was recycling, they're not taking it anymore. People are pushing back. They're tired of it. And it's amazing how much power that is when people decide to stand up and take care of their communities and try to demand technologies that are better. And that's why our process, which is a zero-emission process, is what they're looking for.
Great, thanks.
So I think just to follow up on that, we see, especially in international contexts, a ton of projects that go wrong. The technology had great intention. It was deployed with care, and people that really spent their hearts and minds on it but it wasn't properly deployed. It didn't take the community into account. A little bit like these kinds of technologies. There's a great risk, especially in disaster situations, of rushing in and doing the wrong thing and actually causing harm with a great intention. And so one of the things, I'm headed to Puerto Rico tonight. We're working on a feasibility study around improving resiliency for the next hurricane cycle. So, you know, one of the goals with that is to use the lessons we've learned in Haiti and other places to ensure that whatever we do is improving people's lives, that sustainability is involved, that over the long term, this thing can be funded. Technology goes in, it's underfunded, it can't, something breaks, and it's permanently broken. And so we really want to work through those kinds of things, and that's based on lessons learned and mistakes made over a wide variety of projects. So we try and get better with that kind of ensuring we don't have to tack in midstream based on what we're seeing in the field.
Great, thanks.
I think one of the other key areas is for low income in general is that it's creating so many new jobs.
Right.
And that's that for us, you know, for techs that understand solar and solar connectivity and converters and so on. It's not rocket science. It's you know, it's a skill that anybody can learn. And so we have employees that have come in, you know, from a low level, just a washing a trailer, for instance, that have learned these skills, and we've put them through classes so that they can understand this technology. And next thing you know, that they're applying that directly on our equipment, or you know, moving on to the solar industry in general. So I think that's where you see probably the greatest effect, because people are actually making more money and they're learning skills, and they're bettering their lives along the way.
Yeah, you're putting into practice essentially what Van Jones said yesterday, right? That let's talk to those folks that are going to be displaced by something new, or looking for the work and realizing that they can work and solve the world's problems as well, right?
Yeah.
They can find new work. Great, well, we're just wrapping up here, so I wondered if I would just throw out there, in terms of planes, trains, automobiles, the entire transportation sector, what do you hope to see in the next 10 years? If you just have a little bit of a fantasy for a moment. Anyone want to grab that one? I
personally hope to see a collaboration between Toyota and Star Wagons to create a hydrogen Star Wagon that would only produce water.
I've got the contract right here.
Excellent. I'm so glad you brought it up.
Excellent. Great. Very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's simple, right? I just want to see a zero-emission future for everybody. I want to see where we walk out, and you don't even have to think about whether it's a polluting vehicle or not, that it's just clean and your air is safer to breathe.
Yep, great, thank you.
You know, the profit incentive caused the problem, and I think that's going to be the solution. And so I want to see a future where the better vehicle is the less expensive one, where the least expensive solution is the one that people choose. I love the idea of trusting people's higher morals, higher values, but probably more realistic to trust these people to do what makes the best thing economically for themselves. And so vehicles that are fueled by hydrogen, that's less expensive than gasoline, is going to be more attractive than gasoline. And we can change the world overnight if the numbers are right. So.
Great, thank you.
That's right. So I see, I work in a lens that sees the entire world from a social to technical perspective, moving to a distributed system. And what I think we have to make sure of are two things: that those systems are actually responsive to humanity, and that they provide us the services and health and well-being that we need. And that I think organizations like Green for All are so important, because it's about ensuring that there is inclusion across the board in those things. I think we kind of gloss over that a lot, and so ensuring that those systems as they develop are being supported by great organizations to kind of pull us all into that, I think is the single most important thing and what I hope for.
Great, thank you, thank you. And we made it to the end of 30 minutes without even mentioning flying cars, so I'm looking forward to flying cars. Thank you all, thank you for the panelists for joining us, appreciate it. Thank you.